Hello, welcome to the 5th video of answering questions. Today I have a question asking, do you have tips for doing complex shapes? There are 3 things that I want to talk about in this video. The topics of discussion is the complexity scale, the building blocks in dreams and how they connect, and I'll go through some techniques on how things connect in dreams. But first I want to talk about the complexity scale, because a complex shape is something that is subjective for everybody. Like, in my opinion, the most complex shape is something that doesn't exist, and something that is imaginary and you don't know how it's built. That would make something really complex. I wanted to talk about what makes something complex. And the thing that makes something complex all starts with something very simple. On the bottom of the complexity scale are all of the primitive shapes that are already, pre-made. And when you place it, it's already done. This is already really simple, so this is like the first class of complexity. The second class of complexity is when you go into its properties. So each one of these shapes all have properties that you can adjust. So if you go L1 square on any of the shapes selected, it will give you a couple of options here. And when you modify it, this enters the second stage of complexity. And most of the shapes, they have sections, section options, and hole options. They have looseness options as well, so you can make it loose. So let's go through each one of these. So the cone doesn't have sections, but what it does have is something where you can adjust the scale. So some objects have more editable properties than others. So the donut, you can scale it to be thinner and adjust the looseness. So this is a filled donut, which is similar to the donut, but it's filled, and you can scale it and change the looseness of a filled donut. The wedge, if you go L1 square on the wedge, you can scale it so that it's thinner, and there's a looseness setting, and there's also a hole that you can add by just pressing X and holding it to slide up and down. Next we have the hexagon, and you can also add a hole to the hexagon. There's looseness setting to it. The next one is the pyramid. So if you go L1 square, the pyramid has a bit more flexibility, and this is the closest we have to an actual polygon in dreams, because you're editing the vertices of the pyramid here. So it reminds me a lot about polygon kind of modeling. The next one is a rounded cube. So this one you can scale it, and you can adjust the looseness of it as well. And lastly but not least is the curve tool, which is a really flexible kind of object that you can tweak. So the curve tool is by far the most flexible out of all of them, and you can create tentacles and curves with the curve tool. So we have the first state of complexity, the second state where it is modified, And then the third state is when you combine the shapes. To combine it, you go L1 square, and there's a blend amount option. And when you're working with the blend amount, this is when you enter a third state of complexity, because now you have two objects blending into each other. And it can do it to any kind of object. And every kind of object in Dreams, they all have blend amounts, and this is when you get really complex. So this is the third state of complexity. And in the real world, that's pretty much how everything exists. It's a combination of each of these simple shapes, or a modification of simple shapes, and combined together. You know, if the simple shape is not the kind of Lego block that you're looking for, you might want to modify that block, or combine it with another block to get a shape that you want. And then there's a fourth state where you're working with negative shapes. So when you press triangle, you can subtract shapes away and cut into existing shapes. So if it's really low blend amount, you get really sharp edges, and then if it's high, you get an averaging of a curve going on, which is very similar to how subdivision works in a polygon-based modeling program. So yeah, that's the complexity scale. And the building blocks in Dreams, these are pretty much your building blocks. Everything in real life, you know, it's made up of these blocks. So the question is how do they connect? And there are some techniques, like observational techniques, that you can use that simplifies a complex kind of object. So the things that we look out for is something like line of action or silhouette. And these principles have been around for a very long time. And it's something that animators use when kind of analyzing motion, but it can also be used to analyze, you know, poses in, you know, human characters, or poses in animals, or even like the line of action you can analyze in a tree or anything. So silhouette is basically the shadow of something. And sometimes you don't want to think about the shapes, you just want to think about the shadow of something, which is probably easier to think about. So if you're creating a character, for example, you might not want to create every shape. You just want to block in the shadow of something. So if you think of a giraffe, you know, don't think about the shapes, just think about its shadow. So these are our building blocks here, and what we do when creating this giraffe is like we can fill in the shadow with stuff that matches the best. So maybe the cylinder for the neck, but you can see it's too short. So what do? You modify it. So you go L1 square to get another custom kind of block. And then you go blend amount up halfway, stamp in place. And for the legs, you know, for the body, I might get a curve. And it's just experimenting on how you connect stuff together. to achieve what your imagination is doing. And it's looking pretty bad from one angle, so the silhouette also works from another angle as well. So not only does it work from the side view, you also have to think about it from the front view as well. You know, silhouette can really help with creating something complex. So now I'm onto the giraffe's head. And it can apply to any object or any kind of subject. So then how do you do the ears? Like, we can use like a sphere with a section, because a cube, you know, that would be hard to modify, but this one already looks like an ear. So then, you know, it cuts down a lot of work if you know how to modify it into something that you want. And you know, that's basically the gist of it. And then after that, it's just like cleaning up the kind of blocks. It's like playing with Lego and playing with building blocks. So these are your options. So I'm gonna create the hoof with like a sphere that's sectioned off. So let's do this really basic. But if you want something more detailed, you can kind of cut into it and create the hoof. And then, you know, the neck is feeling a little stiff, so you might want to use something more flexible like a curve tool. So blend them out up a little bit. And then here we can add like the line of action or a line of action so that it's more, you know, appealing. And you know, it's pretty much like any object in the real world, like anything that you're looking at is a modification and combination of like these really simple kind of shapes, and all it is keeping an eye out on which one fits the best. And something else to consider when sculpting in Dreams. Dreams has a limit, a thermometer limit. So in the graphics memory, you know, every sculpture that you have is going to add to sculpture data. So the less shapes that you use and the more, you know, efficient you are, the more space you're going to have. But if you were to do something like me where I create really detailed stuff, like say Indiana Jones here, you know, his face is made up of a bazillion spheres. So if I go into his face, you know, it's made up of a bazillion spheres placed very specifically. If you look at the sculpture, the graphics memory is 99%, which is probably not good for like a video game, but since this is just a sculpture to show off, it's you know, I don't really care. Which leads me to another thing, like if you're sculpting, You can reduce like the graphics memory with an optimization tool in Dreams called Adjust Detail. If you adjust the detail so that is really blue, you can see it becomes like kind of low resolution, which does reduce the graphics memory a little bit. And it's like a balance between, you know, how low can you go, you know. Sometimes lowering the resolution gives you more detail for some reason. So it's something to keep in mind and yeah, to play around with. But overall, my tip with creating anything complex is to think about it simply and to not really think about it as something complex, because every complex object in the universe is essentially just these building blocks that we have in Dreams. It's just all about how you modify it and combine it.